Yul Brynner stopped midline. The entire set froze. 1950 MGM Studios. Soundstage 7. A period drama nobody remembers now. But on that day, in that moment, it became the site of something unforgettable. 100 extras. 30 crew members. A director, 2 assistant directors, a cinematographer, and his entire lighting team. All watching. All waiting. Brynner stood center frame. Perfectly positioned. Mark hit. Posture immaculate. Every muscle calibrated for maximum screen presence. But his face had gone dark. Not the lighting. His expression. Cut the cameras. His voice was quiet. But it traveled. Sound has a strange way of carrying when it's wrapped in ice. The director, Martin Rourke, looked confused. YUL. We were in the middle of... Someone is in my light. Everyone looked around. The lighting grid was perfect. The key light positioned exactly as specified. The fill light balanced. The backlight creating that signature glow on Brynner's shaved head. Everything was perfect. YUL. The lighting is exactly as we rehearsed. Someone is in my light. This time there was no mistaking the edge. Sharp enough to draw blood. Antonio Ruiz stood frozen among the crowd of extras. 28 years old. Mexican immigrant. 6 months in Hollywood. This was his 7th day as a background performer. $7 a day. Enough to send money back to Guadalupe. Enough to keep his mother's medication coming. Enough to survive. He'd been so careful, stayed in his assigned position. Didn't move unless directed. Kept his eyes down. The golden rule of extra work. Be invisible. But something had gone wrong. Brynner's eyes were scanning the crowd. Like a predator searching for movement in tall grass. His head turned slowly, methodically, that famous head catching light like a weapon. Then the eyes locked. On Antonio. You. Antonio's heart stopped. Step forward. He couldn't move. Fear had welded his feet to the floor. Step forward. Antonio stepped forward. Legs shaking, hands trembling. The crowd parted around him like the Red Sea. Appropriate, given Brynner's most famous role. He stood before the star, 5'8", looking up at 5'10", but feeling like a child before a king. Brynner stared at him. Not with anger, something colder. Calculation. Where are you standing? I'm in my mark, Mr. Brynner. The assistant director put me, you're in my light. Antonio looked down at his feet, at the small piece of tape marking his position, exactly where he'd been told to stand. But sir, they told me to stand here. I don't care what they told you. Brynner turned to the cinematographer. George, explain to me why this man's shadow is crossing my face. The cinematographer, George Folsey, a legend who'd shot Meet Me in St. Louis, who'd worked with every major star, looked through his viewfinder, checked the lighting, checked the angles. YUL, his shadow isn't anywhere near your face, he's 8 feet away. His shadow is on my face. It's physically impossible. Are you calling me a liar? The words exploded across the soundstage, echoed off the walls, rattled in everyone's chest. George paused, chose his words carefully. I'm saying the geometry doesn't support. Get him off my set. Silence, complete, total, suffocating silence. Antonio felt the world tilting. This couldn't be happening. He'd done nothing wrong. Stood exactly where told. Followed every instruction. Mr. Brynner, please. I need this job. You should have thought of that before blocking my light. But I'm not blocking. You're arguing with me now? Brynner stepped closer, each movement controlled, precise, terrifying in its calmness. Let me make something very clear. I am not a cruel man. I am not an unfair man. But I am a professional. And professionals don't tolerate interference. He pointed at Antonio's chest. You are interfering. With my performance, with my presence, with my ability to do my job. Therefore, you cannot stay. Please, my mother, she's sick. I need... That is not my concern. The words landed like stones. Hard. Cold. Final. Antonio felt tears coming. Fought them back. Crying would make it worse. Would confirm everything people said about extras. Disposable. Replaceable. Invisible. The first assistant director stepped forward. Tom Bradley. 15 years in the business. Seen everything. Yul. Let's take a breath here. The kid is in his assigned position. If there's a lighting issue, we can adjust. I don't want adjustments. I want him gone. He's done nothing wrong. He's in my light. He's not in your light. Brynner turned. Faced Tom directly. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Are you questioning my perception? I'm questioning your reason. Wrong answer. Brynner's voice went quiet again. Deadly quiet. Then you're questioning me. And I don't work with people who question me. He turned to the director. Martin. Either he leaves or I leave. Choose. Martin Rourke had been directing for 23 years. Worked with temperamental stars before. Dealt with egos. Handled tantrums. But this was different. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a calculated power play. Brynner testing boundaries. Asserting dominance. Making sure everyone knew who truly controlled this set. And Martin knew the math. The studio had invested $2 million in this picture. Brynner was the only bankable star. Antonio was $7 a day. The math was cruel. But it was clear. Antonio, I'm sorry, you need to go. Antonio stood there, unable to process, unable to accept. But I didn't do anything wrong. I know. Then why? Because that's how it works. Martin's voice was gentle, sad, but firm. Collect your things. Check with accounting. They'll pay you for the full day. Antonio looked at Brynner, those black eyes staring back. Emotionless, unmoved, a wall of absolute certainty. I have a family. Everyone has a family. My mother needs medicine. That's unfortunate. No malice in the words. No cruelty, just indifference. Which was somehow worse. Antonio turned. Walked toward the exit. Each step feeling like walking through water. Through quicksand. Through the death of hope. Behind him, he heard Brynner's voice. Let's set up for another take. And someone make sure all the extras understand where they're supposed to stand. A message. A warning. A demonstration of power. In the corner of the soundstage, a young script supervisor named Eleanor watched the entire scene unfold. 26 years old. Smith College graduate. Working her way up in a business that didn't want women behind the camera. She'd been on set with Brynner for 3 weeks, watched him work, studied his process, admired his precision. But this was something else. She waited until the lunch break, found Brynner in his dressing room, knocked. Come in. She entered. He was sitting before his mirror, studying his reflection, always studying, always calibrating. Mr. Brynner, may I speak with you? You just did? Not unkind, just factual. About Antonio, the extra you had removed. What about him? He wasn't in your light. Brynner's eyes shifted in the mirror, met hers in the reflection. Yes, he was. I checked with George, looked at the blocking, verified the lighting angles. Physically, his shadow couldn't reach your face. Then your verification was wrong. Eleanor took a breath. This was dangerous territory, challenging a star, questioning his judgment. But someone had to. Why did you really want him gone? Brynner turned, faced her directly, and for just a moment, Eleanor saw something in his eyes, something that looked almost like pain. Do you know what light means to an actor, Eleanor? She shook her head. Everything. Light is existence. Light is visibility. Light is proof that you matter. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the studio backlot. I grew up invisible, a refugee child. No country, no identity, no importance. I could have died and nobody would have noticed. Nobody would have cared. His voice was soft now, almost hypnotic. When I discovered theater, discovered film, I learned something. In the right light, at the right angle, I could make people see me. Really see me. Not as a refugee, not as an outsider, but as someone who mattered. He turned back to her. Light is control, and control is survival. But Antonio's shadow was crossing my face. No, it wasn't. In my mind, it was. The confession hung between them. Honest, brutal, insane. You fired a man because you imagined his shadow? I fired a man because the possibility of his shadow was too much to risk. Eleanor stared at him. This wasn't cruelty. This was pathology. That's not reasonable. I'm not a reasonable man, Eleanor. I'm a controlled man. There's a difference. He walked back to his mirror, sat down, resumed studying himself. When I'm on set, I calculate everything, every angle, every distance, every possible shadow, every potential interference, every threat to my presence. Antonio wasn't a threat. Everyone is a threat, until they prove otherwise. He was 8 feet away. Today, tomorrow he might be 7, next week 6. And eventually, he'd be close enough for his shadow to actually cross my face. So I eliminated the possibility before it became reality. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're describing paranoia. I'm describing survival. She should have left then. Should have walked away. Should have kept her mouth shut and her opinions to herself. But she didn't. Mr. Brynner, you're one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. You have money, fame, power. What are you surviving? Brynner met her eyes in the mirror. Irrelevance. One word, but it contained volumes. Every day, I wake up and fight to stay visible, to stay important, to stay in the light. Because I know that the moment I allow one shadow to cross my face, it's over. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works. Hollywood is about light, about who shines brightest, about who commands attention. The moment you dim, even slightly, you disappear. He touched his face, studied the angles. I've built my career on perfect lighting, perfect angles, perfect control, and I cannot allow anything to threaten that. Not even an imaginary shadow from a man who was never actually blocking my light. So you destroyed his livelihood over nothing. I protected mine over everything. That's monstrous. That's honest. Eleanor left, disgusted, disturbed, but also understanding something she hadn't before. Yul Brynner wasn't a monster. He was a terrified child who'd learned that survival meant eliminating threats before they materialized. Who'd discovered that power was the only insurance against invisibility. Who'd built an empire of control to protect himself from the chaos that had defined his childhood. But understanding didn't make it right. But the story doesn't end there. Antonio never worked in Hollywood again, not because he was blacklisted. Nobody cared enough about him to blacklist him. He simply gave up, went back to construction work. sent money to his mother when he could, lived quietly, died in 1997, largely forgotten. But in 2003, his daughter Maria was interviewed for a documentary about Hollywood's forgotten workers. My father told me the Yul Brynner story once, about being fired for a shadow that didn't exist. The interviewer waited. I asked him if he was angry, if he hated Brynner for what happened. What did he say? He said no. He said he felt sorry for him. Sorry? For Brynner? Because, my father said, anyone that afraid of shadows is living in a prison. And no amount of fame or money can buy freedom from that kind of fear. Eleanor continued working in Hollywood, became one of the first female producers. Successful, respected, known for treating crew members with dignity. In her memoir, published in 1989, she wrote about the incident. Yul Brynner firing Antonio Ruiz was one of the cruelest things I witnessed in Hollywood, but it was also one of the most honest. Because Brynner didn't pretend to be anything other than what he was, a man so traumatized by invisibility that he'd destroy anyone who threatened his light. Most stars hide their pathology. Brynner displayed his openly, and in a strange way, I respect that honesty, even as I condemn the action. Brynner himself never spoke publicly about the incident. But in 1983, 2 years before his death, he was asked about his reputation for being difficult on set. He was quiet for a long time, then spoke. I've been called many things: tyrant, dictator, narcissist, all probably true. Pause. But nobody asks why. Nobody asks what makes a man so afraid of shadows that he sees them everywhere. What does make a man that afraid? Brynner smiled. Sad, tired, childhood, war, displacement, loss. All the things that teach you the world is chaos. And the only way to survive chaos is to control everything around you. Even imaginary threats. Especially imaginary threats, because they're the ones that become real when you're not looking. This story reminds us that cruelty is often fear wearing armor. The most controlled people are the most terrified. And sometimes the shadows we fight hardest aren't the ones in front of us, but the ones inside us. Yul Brynner destroyed Antonio Ruiz's Hollywood career over nothing. Not because he was evil, but because he was broken. And broken people break others, especially when they're trying to protect themselves from breaking further. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, because behind every act of cruelty there's a story of pain. And understanding doesn't excuse, but it does explain.